Hi everyone, my name is Gracie. Thank you for watching my presentation. I decided to do this research project on the whole foods plant-based diet and how it has positive effects for reversing risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease is the most common cause of death in the US and the westernized world, with someone dying of cardiovascular disease, or CVD as I'll say from now on. Someone dying of this every 37 seconds in the US. There are many risk factors and diagnosis criteria for CVD, including obesity, high blood pressure, and high blood lipid levels. Though there are genetic influences in cardiovascular disease, the Western diet plays a huge role in risk and prevention. About half of all American adults have one or more diet-related chronic disease, including type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease. An estimated 2/3 of adults and 1/3 children and youth are overweight or obese. This is very interesting and would explain why there is such a high prevalence of CVD in the US. It's also really sad and disturbing to know that already 1/3 of American children are set up for chronic disease related to their diet. There needs to be a serious intervention in how Americans feed their children and how they feed themselves in order to change all of our risk factors for cardiovascular disease and the lower quality and length of life that comes with this diagnosis. So, is the whole foods plant-based diet the potential cure for CVD? Possibly, but what is the whole food plant-based diet? This diet involves either mostly or only consuming non-processed plant-based foods. Some people choose to completely eliminate all animal meat and byproducts from their diet, while others still consume these animal products occasionally, but their diet is still largely plant-based. This diet is different from vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian diets because the most important part of this diet is the whole foods aspect. This part of the diet means that there is an emphasis on eating foods that have not been processed. I always like to talk about how Oreos and Wonder Bread are vegan, but they're not exactly health foods. So the difference between being vegan and being eating only plant-based whole foods, it's different because you are avoiding all of those simple carbohydrates, highly processed oils, lots of salt products that are in foods like Oreos and Wonder Bread. These things that are in junk foods and highly processed foods can quickly spike blood sugar levels, increase bad blood lipids, and cause inflammation. So that is the real difference between any other diet and this diet, is the fact that we're cutting out all of those highly processed foods that can be very detrimental to our health. So why is this diet positive for cardiovascular disease? There's a lot of different ways why a whole foods plant-based diet can positively affect one's health, especially in regards to preventing CVD or reversing it. To begin, the reduction of animal products reduces saturated fat, and the reduction of processed food reduces simple carbohydrate consumption. Also, the whole foods plant-based diet is high in fiber, antioxidants, and vitamins. So, what does all of these things that are removed from the diet, all these things that are added to the diet, how does that reduce the risk for cardiovascular disease? So specifically talking about saturated fat is something that's found in a lot of animal products. So when saturated fat loses electrons from normal bodily functions, it tends to stick together. And when it does that, it can create clots or clogs in arteries, which is very dangerous and can increase blood pressure and potentially cause heart attacks. Moving on to simple carb consumption, if you eat a lot of simple carbs, like things that are found in processed foods, that spikes your blood sugar level really fast and really high. And when this constantly happens, not only does it increase your risk for type 2 diabetes, but it also puts a lot of pressure on your liver. These sugars are converted into fat in the liver, and it can cause fatty liver disease, which is a pretty good indicator of cardiovascular disease. They tend to go together, and when your liver is overwhelmed with sugar and simple carbohydrates, it begins to release cholesterol and triglycerides into the bloodstream. And this is dangerous too, because those are things that can also stick, like I talked about before with the saturated fat clumps in the arteries. Those can begin to stick as well into those clogs and make your heart have to work even harder. and potentially be cutting off some blood flow to areas in the body, and that's very dangerous. Whole foods diet that's really high in fruits and vegetables is also really high in fiber. So fiber is something that helps stick to saturated fat when we eat it. You can't really completely avoid saturated fat in your diet because it is in so many things, like in nuts and avocados and chocolate and things like that. So even if you're only eating plants, you can't completely avoid it. But fiber is really positive for sticking to that saturated fat in the digestive system and kind of pulling it out with your stool. So that's really positive. But also fiber, when it is broken down in your large intestine by your microbiome, it releases a whole bunch of chemicals into your bloodstreams that are super positive for cleaning out your arteries. So not only can it prevent the saturated fat from ever entering the bloodstream, it also can begin to kind of wear away at any clogs that already are in your arteries, which is super positive in reversing the disease. There are a lot of antioxidants and vitamins in a diet that has a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains in it. These antioxidants and vitamins can prevent that oxidation that happens to those saturated fats and triglycerides and cholesterols. It can keep them from ever having to stick together at all, because antioxidants give that extra electron to things that have been pulled away by the natural bodily functions, like metabolism, immune system, and those kinds of things. And so those antioxidants are a tool to prevent that saturated fat from ever beginning to clog our arteries at all. So those are really positive things for the cardiovascular system, not only to reduce your risk for CVD, but also to possibly reduce the disease itself and reverse it. So I have a couple of friends who have struggled with high cholesterol and high blood pressure from young ages. Those are both warning signs for cardiovascular disease. These two friends have switched to whole food plant-based diets, and I wanted to share their experiences with how this diet has changed their health and life. The first video is from my friend Nate, who has switched to a vegetarian diet and greatly improved his blood lipid levels.
My family has a long line of heart disease issues, and so I decided I needed to take some preventative measures. So I went vegetarian. Since cutting out fats and as much processed food as I can, I have felt a lot better and feel like I am taking necessary steps to ensure that I don't have heart disease later on down the line.
The second interview is from a friend, Stephanie, of mine, who drastically changed her risk for cardiovascular disease by switching to a vegan diet. She gave me permission to read her testimony on what it was like to switch to a vegan diet and how that has changed her health. After a doctor's visit in 2016, I learned that I was overweight, had high blood pressure, and high cholesterol levels. After lots of research, I decided to make the change in my lifestyle and diet. I went vegan and started exercising regularly. After about 8 or 9 months, I had lost 70 pounds and was able to get my blood pressure under control and lower my cholesterol. Unfortunately, these friends couldn't dig up any blood work from me from before and after their diet changes, so I found a blog on the internet of a man who was working close with this nutritionist to use this diet to change his blood lipid levels. As you can see from his chart, over 3 months he has significantly changed and lowered his risk for cardiovascular disease. He still has a way to go, but his current results are very positive. You can watch his progress at this link here. So why don't doctors recommend this diet change to everyone who either has CVD or is at risk for CVD? Especially when all the science backs up that this diet works. This diet is highly inaccessible for some people. This diet requires a lot of time and money to prepare. Unprocessed foods spoil easily, and so they cannot be bought or prepared too far in advance. For people who are forced to work long hours, take care of family, have long commutes, preparing fresh foods can be too time consuming, take up too much time. Processed foods, fat foods, and frozen foods are much cheaper than whole foods and quicker to prepare. This makes it inaccessible to those who are on a fixed income, where they do not have room in their budget for an expensive diet change. So how do we help prevent CVD if this diet is so inaccessible? Unfortunately, this is why doctors tend to recommend medication over diet change. Unfortunately, we can see that CVD is a systemic issue and not necessarily a choice for those who have it. Greater changes need to be made in our society to help people have access to better foods and be able to take care of their cardiovascular systems. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoyed it.